Kalatalis stepped off the late train into a forest of eyes and felt the old arithmetic begin. Doorframes, thresholds, men's smirks, women's whispers, everything converting her to inches and conclusions. She'd learned long ago that some people didn't greet you so much as size you, and Iron Bend, Idaho territory, obliged by offering a platform built just low enough that she had to stoop to avoid striking the depot's eave. She pretended not to notice. She kept her spine long, the way her mother had insisted, chin level, shoulders open, so her height looked like a decision rather than a mistake. The platform clock read 4:20 in a dusty amber light. The mountains beyond the town rose in a blue wall, their crowns shaved by white scars where logging crews had been at them. The air smelled like pitch and iron. A raven sat on the depot sign, Iron Bend, like a black comma, as if the sentence of her life were pausing to take a breath. "Miss Tallis?" a man called. She turned toward the voice and saw him. Mr. Emery Fitch, the storekeeper who'd written neat letters about his temperate nature and his need for a wife who could assist in my mercantile affairs and comport herself with a modest bearing. He looked smaller than the photograph he'd sent, or perhaps it was that the photo had never included the habit he now displayed, measuring. His gaze lifted from her boots to her face and stopped in a twitch of surprise he tried to smother. "Mr. Fitch," Calla said. She offered her hand. He took it without enthusiasm, palm dry and papery. He had already decided something about her. She could feel the decision land between them like a crate of nails. He gestured to her trunk. "This all?" "It is." He looked at the trunk as if it had disappointed him. We'll have a look at the boarding house. Mrs. Kohler lets decent rooms. Then we can discuss." His eyes went up again, involuntary. Arrangements. Arrangements. The word had been brave on paper. In person, in the mouth of a man subtracting inches from his pride, it sounded like a door closing. They had taken 3 steps toward the street when a boy came running from the telegraph office, waving a paper. "Mr. Fitch, telegram for you." "Emery." Fitch accepted it with the wary look of a man who feared news more than he welcomed it. He tore the envelope, scanned the single line, and went paler than his collar. "Oh," he said. "Oh." He folded the paper very carefully, like it might explode. "Miss Tallis, I find myself, through no fault of yours, indisposed to fulfill our understanding." He coughed. "The stock shipment I was counting on has been delayed. Circumstances beyond—" His eyes flicked to her again. "Beyond all control." Calla could have supplied his real sentence. Circumstances in excess of expectation. She'd heard it said gentler, harsher, more furtive, less honest. Tall as a man, taller than some. Will you ever find someone? How will you dance? Who would reach? The questions had stopped hurting. They had become geography, rivers to ford. Still, under the iron of her composure, a muscle clenched. "I understand," she said, though she did not. Understanding had nothing to do with it. "I wish you good fortune with your store." He thanked her with relief and went away in a hurry, as if dreading she might grow taller while he watched. Calla stood on the platform with a trunk, a letter of dismissal disguised as a telegram she hadn't read, and the flat taste of humiliation she refused to swallow. The raven cocked its head and said, "Grach," which might have meant anything. The wind brought the smell of sap. "Miss." The new voice came warm as bread. Calla turned and found a woman in a soot-swept dress and a shawl the green of bottle glass. She had iron-grey hair coiled under a hat and a face built for both kindness and refusal. Her eyes missed nothing. "I'm Mabel Kohler," she said. "I keep the boarding house. I see men decide things that aren't theirs to decide, and I see women left to make sense of it. You look like you'd rather choose your own sense." "That would be a mercy," Calla said. It surprised her how steady her voice sounded. "I'll take your room," Mabel nodded as if they had agreed on something more important. "Let my Jake fetch your trunk." She turned to the lanky boy who had hovered at her elbow, all elbows, freckles, and attention. "You heard me." "Yes'm," Jake said, bounding forward. Calla stepped off the platform and onto Iron Ben's main street with her chin level and her heartbeat telling the truth. You came for a life and arrived to a cancellation. But life did not always answer at the first knock. Sometimes it wanted proof that you had hands. The street was a shifting assembly of teams, wagons, and men in corked boots whose steps sounded like soft hail on the boards. Shops squatted, with their names burned into planks: Kohler Boarding, Fitch Mercantile, Sutter and Pike Hardware, the Loggers' Rest. A dog slept on its confidence in a patch of sun by the barber. Farther down, the black shine of the river bent around the town. The way a wrist bends around a cuff. The bend gives us our name, Mabel said, reading where Calla's eyes had gone. And the iron gives us our wharves, and the wharves give us our bread. Holt Timbers camp is up Canyon Fork. They'll be bringing a drive down in a week for the army. That's all anyone talks about unless they're arguing about it. Arguing. Logging. Men and arguing are as married as preacher and sermon. Mabel's mouth twitched. Don't mind me, I think in pairings. Comes of keeping rooms. Her eyes moved up and down Calla with the frankness of women who had measured the world and found it wanting. You're a long drink of water, I like that. Means your lungs will work in this air. Calla let herself laugh, small and real. My lungs have never been accused of delicacy. Mabel's smile was a wedge in a door that would otherwise stay shut. Good. This town needs less delicate. It breaks delicate like a bad habit. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story square, with a front porch and ambition bulldogged into it. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and soap. A long table ran down the front room like a river, flanked by chairs of every history. Mabel set Calla at the end near the window, the place where a woman could see the street coming. You can wash. Up there, Mabel said, indicating a basin. Supper at 6. I'll fetch your trunk to your room, and if you want to feel better, you can watch Mr. Fitch count beans in his window and imagine him tripping over his own ledger. Tempting. Later. You can tell me how you ended up on my porch without the man who promised to meet you on it. Do you want the short version or the true one? Mabel cocked her head. Truth has a way of being short when it's ugly, but I'll take whatever you can carry without it falling all over the floor. Calla washed the train from her hands and face. Her reflection in the glass made the old arguments, but she refused them. The woman looking back had earned every inch. Polite had been offered and rejected. She would have to be her own politeness and her own answer. She had just sat when the door opened and a draught of pine came in with 2 men. The first was thin and brisk, eyes the grey of blade steel, a vest that told you who kept the ink in town. The second was built like a long winter, big, deliberate, with a quiet in him that didn't feel empty. His shirt sleeves were rolled, forearms cross-hatched with the small scars of a man whose work used its hands as arguments. He removed his hat as he crossed the threshold and did not put it back on until he had greeted the room. Calla noticed. Little things, because little things had always been used to notice her. She noticed him noticing, but not in the way Mr. Fitch had. He noticed, as if measuring what the room might require and whether he was equal to it. Mabel, the big man said, you see my crew eat. I'll hear less of their opinions if their mouths are full. You pay, I feed, Mabel replied. And if the town runs out of opinions, check under your hat. The man smiled with his eyes. The blade-grey fellow did not smile with anything. Ms. Kohler, he said by way of acknowledgement. Rowan. The name suited the big. Man like a glove suits a hand made for work. He turned to Calla as if he'd felt a change in the room's tide. He did not do the calculation others did. He didn't make a face of surprise barely disguised. He saw her, and after seeing he considered. It was a small grace, and for that very reason enormous. Mabel's table always looks better for being full, he said. I'm Rowan Holt. Holt Timber, the Blade Grey man added like the second half of a fact. And I'm Elias Fisk, Iron Bend Bank and Loan. He tipped his hat with the air of a man who figured hats owed him tips in return. Welcome. To our town, Miss Calla Tallis, she said. Miss Tallis, Fisk said, and made the name sound like a problem to be solved. From where? Down river, Sacramento, by way of wherever a coach goes when it's tired. And what brings you so far north? A letter, Calla said. No need to explain whose. And a habit of keeping my word. Fisk's mouth did something between a smile and a cut. Admirable. We like obligations met here. Speaking of which, Rowan, you've a note at my bank coming due. The army contract lands Saturday at dawn, or the wharf doesn't care whose logs float past its posts. I assume your men are as good at moving timber as they are at eating Mabel's stew. Rowan didn't look at Fisk. He glanced at Mabel's chalkboard, beef stew, brown bread, and then at Calla as if asking permission to seize a chair nearby. She didn't know why the asking mattered until she felt it matter, to be asked, not placed. Miss Tallis, Rowan said, do you mind if we crowd your end of the table? Elias is right. We move timber better with stew in us. Stew, Mabel said, does not oblige men to behave, but it gives them fewer excuses not to. Rowan sat. Fisk stood, preferring to talk down to seated people. He tapped his fingers on the chairback, counting nothing and everything. The army will pay, Fisk said, if their lumber arrives. If it doesn't, they'll buy from Coulter's mill. He looked at Calla to see if the name impressed or frightened. Competition is a spice, Miss Tallis, but too much burns a town's tongue. Then perhaps, Calla said, you should season less with threats. Fisk blinked. Mabel snorted. Rowan's eyes did that smile again. We'll make Saturday, Rowan said, like stating the time. And you'll get your interest. You always do. Fisk tipped his hat. See that I do. Good day, Mabel. Miss Tallis. He left the way a knife leaves a sheath, fast, leaving the idea of sharpness behind. Rowan waited until the door was shut and the room breathed again before he spoke. You answered him like you were used to men who treat words like bills of sale. I'm used to men who treat everything that way, Calla said. Some of them start by tallying a woman at a glance. Rowan's mouth turned. Iron Bend is full of tall trees and short patience. If you plan to stay, it'll try to cut you down to size. Let it try, Calla said, and found, to her surprise, that she meant it. Mabel set bowls before them. The stew was thick enough to argue. Back. Calla ate because she must, because she hadn't eaten since dawn, because humiliation devours appetite, and she refused to go hungry twice. She ate until the room warmed at the edges, and her ears filled with the everyday music of spoons and men's talk. Rowan ate like a man who had learned to value food rather than expect it. Between mouthfuls, he answered the questions Calla hadn't asked out loud. Coulter runs a mill downriver. He's got a safe wharf and a long reach. We've got trees Coulter wants, a bend that will break your heart if you don't read it right, and a clock that never looks away. The army wants our pine. They want it whole, not broken on the rocks. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, caught Mabel's glare, and used a napkin like a chastened boy. My men will do it. They're long on skill and short on sleep. I could. Use another pair of eyes on the drive. You have crews full of eyes, Mabel said. What you need is a book and someone who can read more than the first page. I can read, Rowan said mildly. I've seen you read a ledger like a tree by putting your hands on it and guessing at the count. No offense. Some taken. Rowan set down his spoon. Miss Tallis, do you keep books? I kept my father's store before he died, Calla said. Then I kept books for a dressmaker who didn't trust numbers. I also kept my head while men told me my height promised. Disaster in the home. She hadn't meant to say the last part, but it came out like something dropped and breaking. She waited for the familiar wince afterward. It didn't come. Instead, Rowan Holt looked like a man measuring a timber, straight, strong, with grain. "You could work with, you're hired," he said, as if he'd decided something he liked. "If you want the job. Camp clerk and scaler. You'd keep the ledger, weigh the crew's tallies, count the saw teeth when we sharpen, and argue with me when I say we can't afford new chain. You'd also stand on the river with a peavey sometimes, and point at the thing everyone else is missing. I see far, but I can't always see everything." Calla almost laughed. "You'd hire me because I'm tall." He shook his head. "I'd hire you because you look like you could see trouble before it climbs the bank. The height is a bonus. You'll be eye level with sense where most men stare at noise." It seemed impossible he could have said exactly what she needed, as if he'd looked past her inches into that small, stubborn hearth inside and laid a log there. She didn't let the hope show. Hope made men reckless. It made women visible when they needed to be safe. But she said, "I'll take the job." "Good." Rowan rose. "We leave at first light for camp. Mabel'll see you set with boots, corks, nails in the soles. Otherwise the river will take you as surely as it takes pride." "Rowan," Mabel said, "don't be sending my boarders into the river on their first week." "Then show her how to walk the boom without baptizing herself," he said, mouth tipping. "And send a message to Fitch. Tell him I'll settle his ledger if he ever learns to count people as something other than inventory." Mabel almost smiled. "It'll ruin him." "He's already ruined," Rowan said. "Just doesn't know what to call it." He tipped his hat to Calla. "Sun up, Miss Tallis. I'll treat you like crew. That means respect and work. If you want special treatment, ask Mabel. She's the meaner boss." "True," Mabel said. Rowan left, large without being loud. The room felt shorter in his absence, as if it dropped an inch to make up the difference. Calla set her spoon down. Her hands were steady. Inside, the arithmetic revised itself, not the sum of humiliation, but the addition of a job, a reason, a ridge to climb. She had not come to Iron Bend to be measured and returned to sender. She had come to be useful. Perhaps usefulness, not acceptance, was the better form of welcome. Sunrise found the road up Canyon Fork, the color of hammered copper. Mist stitched the river to the pines, and the call of a far-off saw sounded like a horn being sharpened. Rowan's wagon took the ruts like a creature that knew them. Calla rode beside him, a bundle of cork boots and oilskin in her lap, a ledger pressed against the lower shelf of her ribs. She wore a hat with the brim shaped to keep out the rain. She'd been assured would come even on days the sky swore it wouldn't. "You ever worn corks?" Rowan asked, glancing at her boots. "Not unless a few errant nails in my old soles count," she said. "Put them on before we hit camp. The booms took 3 men last season. I mean to see them pay back some of what they cost." She had known. Men who made promises like oaths. Rowan made promises like tasks. You could lift one end, and he'd take the other. The camp was a subtraction carved from the forest. Bunkhouses, cookhouse, a tool shed bulging with the smell of oil and iron. The river, harnessed by a boom of chained logs, ran like an ox in a yoke, willing, dangerous, aware of its own power. Men moved on the bank and out on the slick, round bodies of the logs, with an ease Calla could only call audacity. Spiked boots held them where sense would not. Voices carried, "Hook! Drive! Mind your feet!" A woman with forearms like fresh split wood came out of the cookhouse, wiping her hands on an apron. "Rowan Holt," she said, "if you bring me one more mouth to feed without warning, I'll season your stew with your hat." "Beryl," Rowan said. "This is Calla Tallis, camp clerk. She'll be prying coin from my fist and sense from yours." Beryl looked Calla up and down, eyes bright as chips of mica. "You're taller than the bunk posts," she said, which was not untrue. "Good. Maybe the men will remember to keep their heads up for once. I'm Beryl Cook, and I cook. If you're foolish, I'll feed you less. If you're smart, I'll feed you more. If you get in my kitchen, I'll feed you regret." "I'll keep to the ledger," Calla said, hiding a smile. "See that you do. Rowan eats like he was dug with a big spoon. He'll tell you he doesn't have time for seconds. Don't believe him. First I make time for work, Rowan said. Then I make time for Beryl, or she adds rocks to the biscuits. You can't tell, Beryl said, on account of your teeth being rocks already. Calla let their rhythm steady her. It felt like a raft, the give and take that kept people afloat in a business that took lives. She followed Rowan into a low building with a table under the window, a stack of old tallies, and a globe with the ocean worn off it by someone's hopeful fingers. "This is the office," Rowan said, "which means it's the place I come when I want someone to tell me what I can't afford, also where you'll sign the men's pay and settle arguments about tallies." "How often do the arguments come?" "Every day that ends in Y." He set his hat on the globe like a crown. "You'll go with the crew when they scale fresh fallen, count board feet, mark rot, toss out the liar logs that only look good on the outside. You'll come back here and make the numbers say what the trees have already said. You'll bring me bad news early and good news never too late. What's the news today?" He opened the ledger to the last entry. "Bad. We're short chain and long on men who think chain never breaks. Good. We've got a new clerk who looks like she can read my lies before I tell them." "Don't put that in the ledger," Calla said. "It's admissible in a court." He grinned. "You'll do." She laced the cork boots, feeling the bite of the spikes through leather, as if the ground had decided to speak to her feet. Out on the boom, men moved like thistle seed in wind. Rowan led the way to a narrow catwalk and looked back. "Step where I step," he said, "and if you fall in, I'll take offense." "I'll save you the trouble," she said, "by taking offense myself." "Better. It's lighter." They crossed to the driving logs and stood where the river braided itself through and under them. The water shoved, pleaded, shouldered. Wanting its way, Calla felt its strength through the soles of her boots, how it insisted without apology. She wondered what it would be like to move how a river moved. Not taller than anything, not smaller, just inevitable. Rowan was watching, her in profile. "What do you see?" She had thought the question was for men only. She let herself answer like a man would. "Your boom's set fair. The chain's uneven on the far side. That raft wants to ride up if the water rises. That curl in the current looks like it wants to peel off and make a jam at the bend. That snag just under the surface," she pointed, "will catch anything that thinks it can crowd past on the inside." The man's eyes slid to Calla. They did that measuring thing and came away with a sneer. "You got a flagpole for a clerk now?" Calla lifted her chin, not because she was offended, but because she refused to be told which way her chin ought to point. Rowan said, "I call her a horizon. She tells me how far I can see." He did not look at Calla while he said it. He said it to the man who needed to hear it. The rider shrugged the insult off with a flick of reins. "Saturday's coming," he said, and rode away through sawdust. Like a man scattering salt. "Is it true," Calla asked when he was gone, "about the rain?" "It's always true," Rowan said. "The rain comes, and men who plan for sun complain about the weather. Then we plan for the rain." Rowan's eyes found hers. "That's why I hired you." She looked away before her face betrayed her. Under the ledger and the work and the careful distance she intended to keep, something warm and traitorous stirred. It wasn't romance, it was relief, the kind of gratitude a body feels when it finally fits a chair after a day of standing. The rain arrived like a crowd. At first, it only made the dust lie down. Then it slicked the logs and turned the mud into something that made a man taller by inches he didn't want. The river rose and spoke in a louder voice. The boom wore a froth beard, double the watch. "At the bend," Rowan ordered. "Shorty, you're on chain. Ox, I want those posts believing in their holes. Beryl, feed every man like he's two. We'll pay you in gratitude and coin later." "You'll pay me in coin now," Beryl said. "Gratitude is a side dish." Rowan grunted what might have been a laugh. He turned to Calla. "You and I will take the catwalk. I want eyes on that curl you pointed at. They went out. The rain pinned her hair to her head. Drops hung from Rowan's lashes like small lanterns. He moved across the slick logs with the practiced balance of a man who trusted his feet and mistrusted everything else. Twice Calla's corks bit and slid and bit again, and twice Rowan's hand steadied her without grasping. He was a man who offered balance and then stepped back when you had it. It was a courtesy she hadn't known to want until she had it. At the bend, the river did what rivers did. It tested every promise men had made to themselves about control. The logs pressed, turned, pressed again. The boom held. Chains squealed. Shorty Miko cursed like a man reciting a rosary. "There," Calla said, pointing. "The snag's worse than we thought. It's not just a branch, it's a whole tree lying under, waiting to catch a sleeve." Rowan swore softly. "We'll cut it loose." He raised his voice. "Pike, hook that sucker and don't let it take you with it." They worked like people who had told the rain to mind its manners and had been ignored. The snag came up like a drowned thing reluctant to return. Men cheered when it cleared. A small victory wrested from a larger battle. "Good eyes," Rowan said again, and this time he looked at her like a man allowed himself a private truth. "Long ones," she said, because jokes were easier than the other words in her chest. Evening brought a different rain, soft, domestic, the kind that laid its cheek on your shoulder rather than slapping you. In the office, Calla tallied what the day had given and what it had taken. Chain links, blood, curses, 3 teeth from a saw that had eaten a nail no one admitted to dropping. Rowan stood at the window like a door. He held a cup he didn't drink from. "You're not married," he said at length, a statement so obvious it oughtn't be spoken. But the way he said it made it not a question about a ring, but about what had been offered and what she had refused. "I received a letter," Calla said. "And then I received a telegram. They did not agree." He waited. Men who worked with trees learned patience. Men who were trees practiced it. The first said, "I would be welcomed," she said. The second said the stock had failed, which didn't prevent the man from ordering sugar, but did prevent him from wanting a wife who reached the top shelf. She meant to laugh and found she couldn't. "I thought I would be ashamed. I'm only tired." "You kept your word," Rowan said. He couldn't keep his from shrinking. That's a kind way to put it. It's the true way. He looked down into his cup like it held a compass. People think a camp like this is only sores and sweat. It's mostly promises. You break them, and the river remembers. She wanted to ask him what promises he'd broken and which the river had remembered. Instead, she asked, "What do you do when men like Fisk hold the town's throat and count the squeezes?" "You make the river say your name before it gets to his door," Rowan said. "And you keep the men on your side by paying them on time and telling the truth when the truth is worse than the lie. That can't always be enough. It's never enough, but it's what I can afford." He set the cup down. "You're not delicate, Miss Tallis. That's not an insult. I stopped being delicate the first time a man told me I was intimidating for standing where I could reach the sun." Rowan made that almost smile that lived in his eyes. "Good. We need that. I can teach a person to read a river. I can't teach them to stand up straight in the rain." Calla looked at him and felt for a bare instant something like recognition, as if the part of her that had looked for home by accident had finally walked past its own porch. She turned to the ledger to give her face a task. "Saturday," she said. "We'll make it." "We'll make it," he echoed, not because he was sure, but because he intended to make the river believe him. The next day brought an envoy from Iron Bend, with news that felt like a thrown stone. "Fisk says the army moved up delivery to Friday at dusk. Wharves are to be cleared for their barges by then. Any logs not in place by nightfall get sold at Coulter's price Monday." "Coulter's price is robbery at a discount," Beryl said. "Fisk knows it," Rowan said, jaw set. "That's why he likes it." He looked at the river as if gauging whether it could be ordered like a stubborn team. We push. Pushing. A river meant running the men hot. It meant more bruises, louder curses, quick bread from Beryl's oven that filled hands and empty gasps and was eaten standing. It meant Calla out on the boom with a peavey, the pole heavy and surprisingly obedient, in her hands, pointing, bracing, calling. Men began to look to where she pointed before they looked to where Rowan did. Rowan noticed and didn't mind. It made the work go. He wore his pride like a coat he hung up when it restricted his arms. The river rose another inch in the night. Friday morning came clothed in fog. The boom creaked and spoke, chain talking to iron in a language of strain. Shorty Miko swore at the sky. Ox lifted posts like fence rails and set them with the gentleness of a man who understood that stubbornness and care weren't enemies. Calla's long eyes saw it first, the wrongness that attends sabotage like a shadow. She would later try to explain how she knew. It was a tilt, a gleam where there shouldn't be gleam, a change in the thrum under her boots as the chain took a load it hadn't earned. "Rowan," she said, sharp enough that his name was an order. "Look at the far. Anchor the pin." He followed her finger. Damn! The pin that held the boom's far chain to its buried iron eye had been set shallow. Worse, the cotter looked like it had been insulted. Bent, not quite through. A good surge would pop it like a button. Someone had wanted it to hold until it didn't. "Shorty!" Rowan bellowed. "Chain! Ox! The sledge! Pike! Your eyes on! The Var Bank. If I see one of Coulter's boys, I'll feed him to Beryl and let her decide whether he's soup." Men scattered, purposeful. Calla didn't move. She saw something else, on the upstream side of the boom, under the press and mill of waiting logs. A box where there shouldn't be a box. Pine boards, black smear at the seams, a short length of fuse like a tail. "Rowan," she breathed. "Powder." He followed her gaze and went quiet in a way that made the day itself go quiet. Powder said a different sort of argument. Powder meant someone didn't trust time to do the breaking. "How long a fuse?" he asked, calm like a man, telling his hands to be steady so they could be quick. "Short. If it's bad powder, it'll smoke like a sermon and do nothing. If it's good, we have minutes. Who set it? Who do you think?" Rowan didn't look at her. "Don't guess unless you can prove it." "I can prove it when it kills someone," she said, and heard the sharpness in her own voice. "Or we can prove it now by not letting it." He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw the choice. Men like him made 100 times a day. Risk, cost, who's back to put the weight on? "Can you get to it?" he asked. Calla didn't ask how many inches she had on the man best suited to the job, or whether he'd hire a tall ledger for a short fuse. She handed him her peavey, tightened her hat, and stepped onto the boom. "Shorty!" Rowan roared. "You watch. Her feet like they're your own. Ox, if that pin moves, you hold it with your hands and your teeth. Pike, anyone on the bank takes a shot. You take his hat and his head below it." Calla moved. The boom swayed under her like something alive. Water shoved at her calves whenever a log rolled wrong. The fuse, if it had been set, was short enough to make a woman consider how fast she could climb through water while carrying fear. She reached the box by planting her boots on 2 separate logs and letting the river argue under her until it tired. She crouched, fingers numb with cold and river talk, and found the fuse hidden under a plank-nailed light. Someone had done a hurried job. Someone had not planned on eyes that noticed gleam where there shouldn't be gleam. "Knife," she said without turning. "Your left," Rowan's voice answered, closer than she expected. He'd come out without asking. She cut the fuse where it met the seam. Tar on her fingers smelled like a lie. She pried up the plank and saw bags of powder that had once thought they were doing railroad work before being invited to a private appointment. "Get it off," Rowan said. His voice didn't change, but the river heard it. Slow. She slid, her hands under the box. It was heavier than her arms liked. The boom flexed. Her feet said, "Not here, not now." She lifted anyway. The box moved, stuck, moved again. A surge hit the boom as if the river, bored of their caution, had decided to have an opinion. The chain took the load with a scream, like something metal remembering it had once been aura and would like to go back to being unmade. "Calla," Rowan said, and in that single syllable she heard not alarm, but calculation. It gave her exactly as much steady as she needed. She stood with the box. Shorty's hand was immediately under one corner. Ox's shadow fell over them both, his reach longer than any man's right to be. Together they walked the powder back across the wobbling world to the catwalk, where Beryl appeared, as if summoned by the smell of trouble, with a wet sack and a look that could douse a fire. "I ain't your powder monkey," she said, and rapped. The box, like a baby being rescued from a lesson it shouldn't have been given. "But I'll carry this one." The river, offended at being outvoted, tried something else. The far pin that held the boom made a sound like a cough. The cotter sneezed. The chain jumped. Men yelled words that were just different conjugations of the same prayer. "Pin!" Shorty howled. "Pin!" echoed Ox. Rowan was already moving. He threw himself to the far side, boots biting, one hand grasping the chain, the other a sledge. Shorty had rolled his way on a rope. He hit the post like he intended to marry it and drove the pin home, while the river tried to pull it out through his shoulder socket. Calla's feet left the catwalk of their own accord. She wasn't thinking. Some things happen too quickly for thought. They are the province of the part of you that has been trained in the dark. She was out on the logs again, braces set, a hand on Rowan's belt, as if she could hold the man too. The world while he hammered it into place. "Almost," he grunted. The sledge rose and fell, each blow a hope the river accepted or denied. The pin sank like sense yielding to persistence. The cotter took and bit. Then something else bit. Wood. On wood, pressure reorganizing itself as only pressure can. The river found new argument. The jam that had been forming up canyon, unknown to their eyes behind a bend, sent its first insult their way. A torpedo log, a big bastard with ambition, surged toward the boom with malice, shouldered by 20 more. It hit with the sound of a door being removed by someone too proud to knock. The boom held. The catwalk did not. The world dropped a foot. The chain sank a handspan. The catwalk, which had been a greedy beam, let go with a noise like regret, and came apart under Calla's boots. She fell. Not far. Far enough. Water went up her sleeves and said, "Come down." The current grabbed her knees. Her corks bit a log, slipped, bit again. She felt the river think about keeping her, then reconsider. Rowan's hand was on her collar. He hauled, not panicked, not delicate, just the physics of a decision. She landed hard against the chain and the man and the post that held the booms. Her pinion in place, the sledge dropped and bounced, missing Shorty's foot by a lesson. "Calla," Rowan said, not as a question, but as an inventory. She answered with breath, chest on fire, pride refusing to cough in front of men who kept their scorn in their pockets ready to spend. She coughed anyway. It sounded like a woman learning the price of the work she'd bought. "You all right?" he asked, and in his voice she heard more than crew concern. She heard the thing she was trying not to put words to, because words make a thing true, and true things get counted. "I'm fine," she lied, "because that's how work continues." "Good," he said, swallowing something. "Because we're not." He pointed upstream with his chin. The jam they'd feared was making itself. Logs stacked themselves at the bend like insults. If it went wrong, the boom would get tested harder than any banknote ever had, and no clerk could countersign it. "Rowan!" Shorty yelled, "We need to open her!" "We do," he said, "without tearing her guts." "Powder?" Beryl asked grimly from the catwalk remnant, as if ready to unwrap the tarred box and give it new purpose. "Not if I can help it," Rowan said. "If we set a charge wrong, we'll chew our own foot off and still be caught." He looked to Calla like a man looking to his horizon. "What do you see?" She saw the whole thing like a map unrolling, force, angle, water trying old habits with new tools, men who'd slept too little, a river that would break a heart if you tried to love it without listening to it first. She saw a key log 3, lengths in, that held the pressure like a finger in a stack of coins. She saw a side channel that wanted to help if someone would cut it a mouth. That, she said, pointing. And there, take the dog off that one, let her turn. Pike, if you open the side, the water'll lift her elbow. Shorty, your chain is too proud, sink it a hair and you'll give it room to breathe. Ox, be ready, because if it goes, it will go all at once and it will try to take you. Rowan, she swallowed, you keep the hammer. You're the weight that makes things stay. He didn't argue. Men who needed their pride to be paid in full died broke. Rowan paid it enough to keep it from complaining and put the rest to work. He shouted orders. Men ran as if invited to outrun fear. The river, unnerved by their agreement, considered a new approach. They cut the dog. They opened the side. The elbow lifted, thought about it, lowered, lifted again as if deciding whether it would accept a future that did not include murder. The chain settled into a lower note. Then, with the sound of a thing recognizing its own name, the jam let go. Water moved, logs moved with it. The boom paid out, took up, held. Men cheered with their mouths shut, because no one wanted the river to think it had been insulted. Rowan turned to Calla. He was wet, filthy, bleeding in 2 visible places, and 3 the day would reveal later. He looked like a man who had run a long argument and believed he had won by offering the other side a better conclusion than he'd wanted. You see far, he said. He said it like a compliment and like a record that would be entered in a ledger that mattered more than money. She didn't trust her voice. She nodded. She wanted to sit and couldn't, because sitting belonged to men who had been small all day and needed the ground to tell them they were bigger than the work. She chose to stand because standing had always been her stubbornness. Friday, Beryl said, appearing with a towel like a flag of truce. If you're going to deliver by dusk, stop congratulating yourselves and push. They pushed. Calla's arms shook. Her long eyes stayed long. Men began to look where she looked before they looked where fear tried to point them. Fisk's clerk rode by at noon, wrote something down, and rode away, with a look that said other men's labor was milk he intended to drink cold. By late afternoon, the river had accepted their terms. The boom delivered its charge to the straight reach before the wharves. Iron Ben turned to watch itself be supplied. The army's barges, grey as dull scents, waited like fat arguments that could afford to be patient. "Chain!" Shorty yelled, and the last of the links spoke the last of their part. "Post," Ox answered, and set it like a man putting his name where he wanted it read. "Now," Rowan said low. The men pulled the release. Their timber rode free. Water became path. The wharves received. Cheering rose, quiet at first, then larger when it became clear the river did not intend to take back what it had been persuaded to give. Calla stood downriver of the wharf, where the catwalk made a lurker's corner, and watched the thing she had joined become the thing it had promised. She should have felt triumph. She felt relief the way a door feels the hand that finally stops pushing it the wrong way. Fisk appeared at her elbow like a reminder that victory has a price. "Miss Tallis," he said, too smooth, "commendable work. Holt's men always surprise me. Do convey to Mr. Holt my satisfaction." "I'll convey your payment to him when you make it," she said. His smile cut. "Always direct. Always. You don't think much of me. I don't think of you, except when your ledger intersects mine." He laughed softly. "You won't do, Miss Tallis." "For whom?" "For anyone who expects the courtesy of being taller than the facts." He tipped his hat. "Carry on. Do tell Mr. Holt to visit my office in the morning. There are papers." "Papers," she said, as if the word had worn too many hats. He left. Rowan found her there a minute later, rubbed raw at the edges but whole. He had that look a man gets when the thing he is also is heavier than the thing he does. "We made it," he said, and the words came out like a man admitting surprise in private. "We did," she answered. The river made a lower sound, like a large beast deciding to sleep. Rowan looked at her then with a different focus, like a man letting his eyes tell the truth because his mouth wanted to but didn't trust itself. "Calla," he said, "I'm saying this so you can put it wherever you put the numbers that matter." He swallowed. "When Fitch said too tall, I said perfect. I meant it. I mean it." Heat found her face in the cool dusk. Humiliation shrank when measured. Against that, she did not look away, because she had promised herself she would not be the first to flinch from what she wanted and feared wanting. "You hired me for a job," she said. "I took it." "I did." "You did." He lifted his hands and let them fall, as if giving up on finding a gesture that would not embarrass both of them. "We'll talk later. Work first." "Work," she echoed, because if she said the other word, whatever it was, she would have to admit what it would change. They didn't talk later. Later came at them sideways. Night uncorked itself over Iron Bend. The river, put to bed, muttered in its sleep. Men ate like they were trying to replace themselves with food. Beryl set out a pie that tasted like forgetting trouble for 12 bites and then remembering it just as you reached for 13th. Rowan sent the army barges off with their manifest signed in Calla's hand. He accepted Fisk's receipt with the graceless gratitude men extend to a thing that proves an enemy is useful in ways that make him necessary. Calla recorded every sheet as if paper could be made to stop lies by holding enough truth. She had just closed the ledger when Jake burst into the office without knocking, meaning the knock would have wasted breath. "Rowan, Miss Tallis," he gasped. "Mabel says, she says." He gulped, hands flapping like sparrows. "The boathouse, fire." Rowan was moving before the word finished burning through the room. Calla ran when his shoulder clipped the door jamb and bounced off it. If a door could be forgiven for being in the way, it was forgiven. Outside, the river wore a grin of reflected flames. The boathouse on the far side of the wharf, a backwater cove where Holt Timber kept spare chain and tools, was a black square with a crown of orange. Men and boys, with buckets, arranged themselves into a long argument with heat. "Who's inside?" Rowan asked, voice already hoarse from the smoke he hadn't breathed yet. "Mr. Nye," Jake said, eyes huge. "He went in for the chain. He hasn't come out." "Nye's leg," Shorty said grimly. "He drags it. He won't outrun a rabbit, much less a roof." Rowan looked at the water. He looked at the fire. He looked at Calla like a man asking permission to do a stupid thing because all the smart ones had been used. "You can't carry him alone," Calla said, "because truth has to be spoken even when it's the last thing anyone wants to hear." "I won't be alone," he said. "You coming?" She nodded before fear could remember her name. They went into the water because the dock between here and there was already throwing sparks like a blacksmith who'd forgotten what he meant to make. The river hugged them cold. Smoke hugged them hot. The boathouse door yawned like a mouth with its teeth knocked out. Inside, heat talked in sentences that were no longer polite. "Nye!" Rowan yelled, and the smoke answered with a cough that might have been a man or the building dying. They went anyway. Calla kept one hand on Rowan's belt, because that had worked once, and would work again until a better idea came along. She felt the world shrink to a small circle of orange and a smaller circle of determination. They found Nye by stepping on him. He rose from the floor with the surprised grunt of a man who has discovered he is the obstacle he was cursing. Rowan grabbed him under the arms. Calla took his legs. The world shifted. Something overhead cracked and came down with a vocabulary of sparks. "Go!" Rowan coughed. They went. Outside was a different problem. Air that didn't hurt. Water that did. They dropped Nye and rolled him into the river to teach his clothes manners. He came up swearing like a saint who had just realized heaven makes better pie. "Chain," he said, delirious, and Shorty laughed like a man rescued from a joke. The boathouse, insulted, made a sound like an oath and threw a beam at the dock. Men scattered. Women who had come to pass buckets did not scatter. They redirected. Fire doesn't argue with women the way it argues with men. It knows who has the patience to outlast it. Calla stood soaked, shaking, smoke-clean with river dirt, and saw the thing she had almost thought she deserved. The sight of a man who saw her and did not diminish to make his seeing tolerable. Rowan, steam coming off him like a horse at the end of a long pull, looked at her in the lightning of the firelight and the river's whispers and said the thing she had been braced to hear and yet not ready for. "Perfect," he said softly, as if giving the word back to someone who'd had it stolen. The word didn't land the way Fitch's had. It did not measure. It recognized. She felt for a dangerous heartbeat, like she could stand inside it and not have to lower her head. A gunshot cut the moment in two. The sound came from the tree line beyond the boathouse, a flat, mean crack. Wood splintered near her shoulder. A second shot smacked the dock post. Men roared. Instinct broke the crowd into 100 incorrect decisions. "Down!" Owen bellowed. He shoved Calla toward the boathouse shadow. Splinters hit his sleeve. Another shot spat sparks from the iron ring that had held the boatline, inches from Beryl's ear. She cussed the word's mother. "Where?" Shorty yelled, already running the wrong way with his heart ahead of him. Calla's long eyes, made for horizons and taught by fear to be exact, found it. The flick of muzzle flame in the trees where the bank lifted, the silhouette of a hat that was not Holt. Timber shape, the way the shooter shifted to a second firing point with practice you didn't hire unless you paid men to do damage. "There," she said, pointing, voice steady, because a voice had to be steady when everyone else's legs weren't. Rowan didn't. "Look." He moved in front of her like a door you put between what you love and what intends harm. Old sin or new debt. The shooter had good aim and worse intentions. Another shot cracked. Rowan's shoulder snapped back as if somebody had tugged a rope tied to it. He grunted and turned, trying to keep his feet where they were needed and his body where damage would be spent on him and not anyone behind him. "Rowan," Calla said, and the rest of his name stayed in her chest because the night took it. He looked at her once, eyes clear under the smoke. "Stay down," he said. The catwalk gave way like a secret, ribs splitting under the river's shove. Wood and nails went past Calla's ear in a wet hiss. She felt the drop before she heard it, the world stepping down without warning. Someone shouted, "Shorty, maybe," and then Rowan's hand clamped her collar and hauled her sideways as another shot snapped the air where her shoulder had been a heartbeat before. "Trees," she said, pointing, because her voice stayed steadier than her knees. "High bank, second stand, see the split trunk?" Men looked and looked wrong. Panic makes eyes lie. Rowan didn't look. He shoved Calla toward what shadow the burning boathouse gave and took the space in front of her unasked. Body big as a door the shooter would have to walk through to reach her. Another crack. The post beside Beryl's head spit splinters. Beryl swore and dropped behind a barrel as women and boys flattened against the dock timbers and men fumbled for rifles they'd left leaning too far from their hands. "Down!" Rowan bellowed. "Hold your fire till you see it." Calla's long eyes, no friend to guesswork, found the dark ovate of a hat and the thin ghost of muzzle smoke where the river cut the hill. The shooter had shifted left into a notch between two pines, the way a man who knew what he was doing would. She traced his retreat with a finger on Rowan's sleeve. Rowan nodded, as if he had felt her point through cloth. "Ox," Rowan barked without turning. "Flank right, stay low. Shorty, you take the left and keep your head behind something you won't miss." "Which excludes my brains," Shorty muttered, already moving at a crouch. "Jake," Calla said, catching the boy's sleeve. "Back to Mabel. Tell her to pull everyone into the lee and keep the buckets moving from the river on the far side. If anyone sticks a head up for a better... Look, she has my permission to knock it down." Jake went like a thrown stone. Mabel didn't need permission to command. She used it anyway, voice sharp as a ladle. The bucket line reformed in the boathouse's shadow, and the fire dulled from roar to argument. 2 more shots. The first slapped the river with a spiteful smack. The second took a chip from the dock and ricocheted harmlessly into the water like a thought going nowhere. Ox disappeared into the underbrush to the right, moving quiet for a big man. Shorty's hat bobbed left and then reappeared where it shouldn't have. Calla hissed his name, and he dropped before the next round could correct his mistake. Silence. That wasn't. The fire hissed, buckets thudded hand to hand. The river breathed like a sleeping animal considering waking. Calla listened for the minute sound that meant a rifle bolt being worked, a man drawing breath before another choice. She heard instead the soft curse a hunter makes when his sightline goes dirty. "He's pulling back," she said. "He'll try to get around to the road." "Shorty," Rowan called low, "let him. Don't chase anything you can't carry." "Back." "Copy," Shorty breathed. Ox's shape rose like a stump and then settled again. The shooter's shadow slid away, disappearing into the black stitchery of trees. A moment later the night closed the rent he'd made in it, as if darkness disliked being counted. Rowan's shoulder bled down his sleeve, but he didn't favor it until the shooter's absence felt less like a trick and more like a fact. Only then did he sag a fraction against the post he'd used for cover. Calla saw him go pale in the firelight and smelled the copper of what the bullet had written. "Sit," she said, sharper than she meant, because fear and fierceness wear the same clothes in a pinch. He began, "which is what men say when they aren't. Sit." She put a hand steady by force on his unwounded shoulder and forced him down to the dock. Beryl appeared with her apron already torn into strips and a bucket she'd claimed from the line without asking forgiveness. Together, they cut the shirt away from the wound. It wasn't the worst Calla had seen. The bullet had ploughed rather than planted, gouging a raw furrow across the meat of his shoulder, deep enough to make a man see stars, not deep enough, she prayed, to map an ending. Still, blood made the wound look like the river had opened a smaller river under his skin. "Hold him," Beryl said. "I'll fetch Dr. Harper, and if I catch that snake with the rifle, I'll put him in a pot and see if he tenderizes." Calla pressed a folded strip tight above the worst of it. Rowan's jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed on the tree line. She hated him a little for that. She loved him a little for it too. Both were the same impulse, admiration's angry cousin that resents being made to care. "Calla," he said, finding her name instead of air. "I'm here. You see his rifle?" I saw his position. Not the make. Even bleeding. He was reading the ledger of the night. "Long barrel," she said. I couldn't swear to the rest. The muzzle flash was tight. He's shot trees before. Rowan grunted, not at the pain. "Sawyer or hired hand?" "A hand for hire," Calla said. This wasn't a grudge with heat on it. It was a job with directions. "And pay." His mouth tipped, Galilean crooked. "We'll take that out of him last." She couldn't help it. She smiled, a brief flare in a wet night. Then she tucked the cloth tighter, and he hissed between. Teeth! And she wished she could take that back without taking back the bleeding. Dr. Leon Harper came as if she had known to arrive before the gunshots. Tall in her own right, though not Calla's kind of tall. She moved through men like a trained idea, not to be argued with unless you'd brought better science. "Let me see," she said to nowhere and everyone. Her hands were quick, clean in the dirty light. "Grazed deep. Lucky it's not lower. You'd be speaking to me in gurgles." She cut, washed, packed, wrapped, talking all the while with the voice of a woman who has seen fuss kill patients. Faster than bullets. "Keep that arm tied to your side till I tell you otherwise. If you think better of me and disobey, I'll stitch you to your shirt and let Beryl feed you soup through a funnel." Rowan nodded, the only obedience she'd get. He watched the boathouse. The roof sagged and gave, the walls bowed, confessed, and finally fell in toward the river. The bucket line cheered without joy and went to stomping out sparks like the ends. Of angry thoughts, Elias Fisk arrived with a deputy at his shoulder like punctuation. His hat stayed dry through the rain, which struck Calla as wronger than the fire. "My word," he said, surveying the burning and the men with bandages. He looked pleased in the way some men do when their predictions of trouble come true, on schedule. "Mr. Holt, I see your camp has expanded its services to include entertainment." "Go home, Fisk," Beryl said, without turning. "You'll catch smoke on your cuffs." Fisk's mouth twitched. "Deputy Lowe, you'll make a note that Holt Timber's boathouse, insured and encumbered to Iron Bend Bank and Loan, is now a charred liability. We'll have to consider the effect on our mutual obligations." "Mutual," Rowan said. "It would have been a laugh if it weren't so tired." "You put powder under our boom the last hour?" Fisk's brows climbed, polite. "My dear Mr. Holt, a powder? Do you take me for a fool?" "I take you for a banker," Beryl said. "The alphabet's shorter." Calla stood. Her knees stopped arguing with her just long enough to be used. She reached into her oilskin pocket and pulled out the curled stub of fuse she'd cut, the tar still tacky. She held it up like a receipt. "This was under our boom," she said to Fisk's dry hat, "along with a box of powder. The cotter on the far anchor was bent and set shallow. Somebody meant the river to do more than carry logs." "Oh my," Fisk said softly. "Then by all means summon the sheriff you haven't got. While you wait, perhaps assign blame at random. I recommend beginning with the moon." "Don't play dumb," Mabel said from behind a wall of women who had just saved. "A structure without tools. It doesn't fit you." Fisk's eyes flicked over the women and away as if glances could be spent. "Deputy Lowe," he said, "make a note as well. Holt Timber admits to possession of unlicensed explosive material." Rowan tried to rise. Dr. Harper's hand was iron on his good shoulder. "You'll sit," she said in a tone even men stooped to, "or I'll lay you down." Calla stepped between Fisk and the man who would always try to stand, even when standing cost him. "Deputy," she said, eyes to his name before she used it. "You make 2 notes. One that the Army's delivery was completed on time and accepted, and one that a man took rifle shots at unarmed people from Fisk's insured tree line at the precise moment our boathouse went up. If those notes go missing, I'll write them on the front of the bank with a coal from what's left of the dock." Deputy Lowe's face worked. He was young in the way good men are young, the kind that still thinks the world can be persuaded. With fairness, he nodded almost apologetically and wrote. Fisk smiled like a set of neat figures. "You have a talent for theatre, Miss Tallis. I look forward to your performance tomorrow morning at 10, when Mr. Holt attends my office to discuss his note, his interest, and his unfortunate decrease in collateral." "Morning," Calla said. "Fine. We'll bring the Army's signed manifest and their coin." Fisk's smile deepened. "Do. I should like to examine it before I decline to accept it." "You don't get to decline." "In matters of banking," Fisk said, "I find I often do." He tipped his hat to nothing, that lived and left a wake of irritation behind him like a boat that had never hauled anything useful. Dr. Harper stitched. Calla held. Beryl cursed the world into something that would sit still for soup. The boathouse dwindled to a frame, and then to a silhouette of a memory. When fire is done with a thing, it leaves you its shape, like a reprimand. Rowan watched Calla, not watching him. "You saved the boom," he said when Dr. Harper finally stepped away and nodded permission for words that were not ow. "We saved the boom," Calla said. "Shorty saved the chain. Ox saved the post. Beryl saved Nye with indignation and a bucket. I cut a string. You saw before I did." He said it like a ledger entry that should go on the right side. She almost said no. She didn't. "I did." He nodded, his mouth crooked in a way that, without pain, might have been beautiful. "Good. Don't stop." "Rowan," Dr. Harper said, "if you attempt to stand on that shoulder in the next 24 hours, I will sit on your chest until you reconsider your life." Rowan considered and remained seated. Calla stood because she didn't know what to do with the look in his eyes if she stayed. She walked the charred line where the boathouse had been and found a thing that didn't belong, a spent casing tucked into a tangle of grass, the brass scarred by a scratch on one side that lined up with a misfiled extractor. Habit made a mark. Men make habits out of everything, including murder. She picked it up and kept it in her palm like a promise. Morning scraped sleep off Iron Bend with a rough hand. The river smelled clean, like it was trying to apologize for the night's behavior. The wharves wore damp shame. Holt Timber's men wore the faces of people who had slept, but not enough. Calla walked into the yard with the ledger under her arm and the casing in her pocket. She wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled, an oilskin that no longer cared about its own stains, and a pair of corks that felt less like a borrowed language than they had on her first morning. Men lifted hands in greeting and respect. She returned, both with her chin. "Payday," Shorty said, thumbing at the ledger. "After the bank," she said. Shorty spat into sawdust. "Bank's a bad word." "It is," she said, "and it often tells you who says it." She and Mabel walked to town together because there are errands you run with someone who can be counted on to tell you when you're about to do the brave thing that also happens to be the stupid thing. Beryl waved a ladle in benediction at Iron. Ben Bank and Loan. Fisk had arranged his smile and papers on the same shelf. He nodded to them both as if acknowledging the presence of weather he couldn't change but could discuss at length. "Miss Tallis," he said. "Mrs. Kohler, Mr. Holt." "He's not your business," Calla said. "His account is. I have the Army's signed manifest and their payment order." "Let me see." He took the papers with care. He appreciated documents the way some men appreciate pretty necks, for the leverage they offer. He read the manifest once, then again in a way that looked like he was savoring a wine before sending it back to the kitchen. "Very fine. And the payment?" Calla put the envelope on the counter and didn't take her hand off it. "Coin, as agreed." Fisk looked as if someone had bought him a present he would need to say thank you for. He tisked softly. "We do prefer drafts, Miss Tallis. Coin is so heavy. That's why we brought it," Mabel said, "so you could feel the weight of other people's labor before you count it." Fisk's eyes flicked. He opened the envelope and let the coin clink into his palm like a small storm. "Alas," he said, "I am unable to accept this." "Pardon?" Calla's voice went so flat it could have been used to level a shelf. "The bank, myself, must decline acceptance until the matter of last night's fire and Holt Timber's diminished collateral is resolved. Your boathouse was encumbered to this institution. Its loss affects the ratio of your borrowing." He smiled like a man who thought metaphors counted as help. "I cannot pour water into a barrel with staves missing." "You're going to hold back wages." Mabel's voice went low and dangerous. "You're going to starve men who risked their necks in your insured river because your sums have a cold?" Fisk spread his hands. "We'll escrow the funds. Once the investigation proves the fire was not a scheme to defraud—" "You're saying we burned our own boathouse?" Calla asked, and the bank's floorboards seemed to lift under her heels. "I'm saying we must protect the integrity of the institution." "Your institution," Mabel said. "Your integrity." Calla put both hands on the counter and leaned in until Fisk had to tip backward to keep his smile from bumping her. "No," she said. "You're saying you want to starve us into selling." "To Coulter!" Fisk opened his mouth. She didn't let him fill it. "Here's what happens instead. We will pay our men today. The Army will pay us directly if you refuse your function. I will take this manifest you've initialed as reviewed," she tapped his penmark with a finger, "and walk it to Major Ellery at the wharf. He will hand me coin. I will walk it back past your window so you can watch a woman do a banker's job. Then I will go to the Telegraph and advise the branch in Canyon City that Iron Bend Bank and Loan is refusing a federal payment without cause. When they ask why, I'll write your reason in one line: because my client's boathouse burned." You'll find the answer to that question doesn't travel well. Fisk's face changed at the edges like a loaf that realizes it will not rise. You are forceful. I am accurate, she said. Major Ellery will confirm with you that under Clause 5 of the Army's purchase order, disbursement can be made on site in the event of dispute. Fisk didn't blink often. He blinked now. The blink said, I didn't read Clause 5 because I expected to enjoy saying no without consequence. He recovered. There's no need for drama. I simply require proof that Holt Timber did not set its own property alight. Bring me a report. From whom? Calla asked sweetly. From the sheriff we don't have. From Deputy Lowe, who answers to a bank that won't pay his wages either. She tapped the counter with the casing she'd found just once. Or, shall we ask Jeremiah Pike to send one of his boys? He's very obliging lately. Fisk saw the casing. He saw the scratch. His eyes told the truth for a fraction of a breath before his mouth lied again. I have no idea what that is. She did. She carried Coyne back through town with Mabel beside her like a guard and a counsel. They paid men in the yard under the bright indifference of noon. Shorty kissed the coin. Beryl boxed his ear for getting grease on it. Ox said nothing, and looked like a man about to cry in private, with his hand over his mouth to hide it. Rowan watched from the office door, his sling bound tight, his eyes loose with relief he tried to keep buttoned. You wrestled money out of a rock, he said when the line dwindled. The rock didn't know Clause 5, she said. I read. Ahead. He made that small, crooked knot smile. Good woman, she had to look away again. There was too much in the room between them that wasn't ready to be tall in the open. By dusk, a note arrived at the yard in the pocket of a man who didn't like the job of carrying it. He held it like a live thing and offered it at arm's length. From Coulter, he said, and his face apologized before his mouth did. From Jeremiah Pike. Rowan took it without a handshake. He flicked the seal with his thumb and read, the neat cursive of a man who liked to see his name written nicely. Rowan Holt, regret last night's unfortunate excitement at your wharf. We must all strive to keep commerce peaceful. In that spirit, meet me at my mill at noon tomorrow. We will discuss terms to ensure Iron Bend's future stability. Come yourself or send an associate of standing. No need to bring half the town. Jeremiah Pike. He wants you without witnesses, Mabel said, reading over Rowan's arm without apology. He wants to measure me without a yardstick, Rowan said, voice like a heavy tool he could use, or not. He looked at Calla. I can't go. His glance at his shoulder was brief and hateful. But I won't send my men into that yard without someone who knows what she's looking at. You're not sending me, Calla said before he could propose it like a suggestion she could refuse. I'm going. Rowan's jaw tightened. He'll come at you sideways. I'm tired of sideways. She folded the note. I'll take Oxen Shorty. Mabel, if you come, you can hit him with a ladle if he tries anything with me. Mabel made a sound like a woman who had just been promised use of her favorite pan. I'll fetch the big one. Rowan reached for Calla without meaning to. His hand hovered and then landed light on her forearm, careful of the place where a bruise could bloom if pressed. If anything smells wrong, you leave. You don't win by standing your ground and letting someone else pick it. She covered his hand with hers and left it there exactly one heartbeat longer than prudence. I'll come home, she said. He let go as if that were a thing his body had learned to do that very moment and didn't like. Coulter's mill wore its wealth like a suit, creased and clean. The yard was orderly in the way that says men are not allowed to make mistakes more than once. Jeremiah Pike met them on the office porch with a cigar that made the air smell expensive. Miss Tallis, he said, eyes sliding up and down her height with exactly the calculation she had expected. He made his smile do the rest. You are formidable. You are late to that conclusion, she said. This is Ox, this is Shorty, this is Mrs. Kohler. She bites. Mabel bared her teeth in a way that made Shorty snort and then choke it down. Pike's smile didn't move. Let's talk business. He led them into a room with maps on the wall and money in the drawer. He sat. He did not offer them chairs, until Mabel took one without waiting, and Calla remained standing because she refused the theatre of being made smaller to fit someone else's furniture. "You're in trouble," Pike said pleasantly. "Your boathouse is gone. Your banker is a man who prefers his debtors on their knees because he finds necks easier to see that way. Your army contract was a good start, but the second one, oh, you didn't know about the second one. It will require more chain than you own and more goodwill than you have." He flicked ash into a tray that had never been asked to serve a purpose beyond catching other men's waste. "Sell to me. I'll keep your men in bread. I'll put Rowan in a supervisory role. You, Miss Tallis." He let his eyes run again. "You can keep books for me and be seen as a novelty rather than a scandal. You want Holt's timber," Calla said, "and you want the Bend because you don't know how to read it, and you can't stand not owning what frightens you." Pike's eyes cooled. "I want Iron Bend to have one mill, well capitalized and well run." "You want Iron Bend to have you," Mabel said. "You and your mirror." Pike ignored that. "Miss Tallis, you will do Rowan a kindness by persuading him to sign. He's a proud man. Pride and notes don't share pillows." "Notes," Calla said. "Performed last night by a man with a rifle and a box of powder." Pike spread his hands, displaying a record of cleanliness that paper often lies about. "I heard of your misfortune. I cannot control the criminal element any more than I can stop the rain." "You can stop paying it," Mabel said. Pike laughed, delighted at his own tolerance. "Mrs. Kohler, you would make a fine banker. You've the temperament." Calla took out the casing and set it on Pike's desk. "Your man dropped this." Pike glanced. If his eyes flickered, it was the candle, not his conscience. Half the valley shoots that caliber, and half doesn't carve the same notch. In their extractor that leaves the same scratch down the casing. She tapped the mark. "Habits, yours are expensive." Pike's mouth thinned. "You will regret making enemies, Miss Tallis." "I prefer them to pests," she said. "They're easier to see." She turned to go. "If you try to break our boom again, I'll make your name a lesson in town. Not because I like talking about men, but because I like telling the truth. About weather." Shorty and Ox rose with her. Pike stayed seated, which was a kind of rudeness that looked polite. "If you want to keep paying men," he said to their backs, "you'll need your banker. And if you want your banker, you'll need me." Mabel paused in the doorway and looked over her shoulder with a smile that has no sugar. "Jeremiah, if I have to choose between starving under your table and stealing food off it, I'll choose the one that lets me look at myself in my wash basin." They left. Outside, the light felt cleaner, as if air prefers to be exhaled by trees rather than men like Jeremiah Pike. On the road back to Iron Bend, they took the lower track by the river, because the upper track ran too close to the tree line where a rifle might try opinions. Shorty ranged ahead. Ox walked behind Calla with his eyes doing the job of two men's hands. They heard the shot before they saw the man. The crack tore the air and snapped a piece off a sapling 2 feet to Calla's left. She hit the ground. With a speed not delicate, Mabel with her, Shorty already rolling into the ditch, and Ox stepping into the path of a second bullet with his shoulder turned to sacrifice meat. "Shoot her!" Shorty yelled, which was news for everyone and no one. Calla's eyes did what they did. She saw the muzzle flash halfway up a slope, in a slot between 2 rocks where a man could lie and feel superior to gravity. She saw, too, the thing that men who aren't thinkers rarely consider, the escape line. He'd cut himself a path down the backside to a wash where a horse waited by the sound of its bit clinking. She marked both routes in her head. "Shorty," she said, "don't go left, he's set it. Ox, go right and up the drainage. Mabel—" "I'm not a boulder," Mabel said, "but I can hold like one." She pulled a short shotgun from under her skirt. Calla had never asked which fabric hid that iron, and fired both barrels into the notch where the smoke had been. Bark and profanity flew. The hillside went quiet. Then a man's shape disengaged from it like a bad idea changing its mind. He slid down the far side fast and ran along the wash toward the road bend. "Horse!" Calla said, and Ox was on his feet before sense could catch him. He cut across the slope at an angle that would have made a goat consider a different profession. He reached the wash as the horse's head came up. He didn't grab the reins. Any fool could be dragged that way. He put his hand on the animal's cheek and spoke nonsense to it in a tone that meant water. The horse believed him because horses prefer being told they are good to being compelled. So do men when it comes down to it. The shooter saw Ox, saw the horse defect, and did the math. He fired once at Ox and missed because Ox didn't move the way he thought a big man would. Then he ran into the trees on foot, shedding the idea of victory, like a coat that didn't fit. Shorty started after him and stopped when Calla said his name with a blade in it. "No chase," she said. "He wants you to run into what he left behind. He'll make another try when he thinks our backs are for sale." They walked the rest of the way with the river to their right and the town's roofs appearing ahead. Like compromise, Ox led the horse by the mane, as if picking up a lost child. Calla rubbed its neck where the shooter's hand had been and felt the trespass lift. They reached Iron Bend to find news waiting like a dog that had chewed what it shouldn't and now wanted praise anyway. A messenger from the army with a second purchase order for planks and spars, larger than the first and due sooner than a polite schedule would allow. Rowan read it twice. "We can do it," he said, in the tone of a man who had decided to grow a second pair of hands. "You can't lift a mug," Dr. Harper said. "I wasn't counting mine," he said. His eyes slid to Calla. "Will you take the river?" She didn't answer right away because her body had grown used to choosing not to be seen. Being chosen asked it to do something hard in a different direction. "I will." He nodded once. It meant more than a handshake would have. That night they set a guard on the yard. Ox at the north gate with a club that looked like it could dent tomorrow. Shorty walking the river edge with a lantern hooded low. Beryl with a pot of coffee and a skillet. Mabel with a book of names and a pencil to write them down if any man wanted to be remembered for the wrong reason. Calla sat in the office with the ledger and the casing and drew a line between the world and the page that felt like a wall. "Sleep," Rowan said from the doorway. He lurked there like a man who hadn't decided whether to go in or out. "When?" "The numbers sleep," she said. "Their eyes open at both ends," he said. "They'll watch while you close yours." She almost obeyed. She didn't. A knock at the office door. 3 quick, 1 slow. Announced Deputy Lowe. He looked. "Embarrassed to have come, Miss Tallis," he said. "Mr. Holt, Mr. Fisk, insists I inform you that the bank will not be open for deposit tomorrow. Something about audits. He also asked me to ask you, unofficially, if you enjoyed your conversation with Jeremiah Pike." Rowan made a sound low, in his throat. "I told Fisk," Lowe said quickly, "that I do not carry gossip. He said, 'Very well, carry arithmetic.'" He shifted foot to foot. "I thought you'd prefer to know he's counting." "He's always counting," Calla said. "He just doesn't count the right things." Deputy Lowe hesitated. "I'm not supposed to say this," he said softly, "but if you need a hand who wears a badge to stand watch some nights, I can forget where my bed is." "Thank you," Calla said. Men who offered what they had were worth making room for. He left. Rowan didn't move from the doorway. "You told him you'd come home," he said. She looked up. The ledger had used the rest of her calm. "I did. You did," he repeated, as if confirming a thing the night had tried to make him doubt. He swallowed. "I keep wanting to say something that sounds like gratitude and ends up sounding like other things." She could have made it easy. She didn't. "Say the gratitude." "Thank you," he said. It turned out to be enough. The second drive began under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and restraint. Men worked like they had learned the river's habits and were ready to be surprised anyway. Calla moved along the boom with her peavey and her notebook. She called and men listened. Rowan watched with a sling full of stubbornness and kept his hands off the world unless it tried to harm her, at which point his fingers clenched on nothing and made it into something anyway. By noon they had 1,000 logs penned and the chain. Speaking in a deep voice that sounded satisfied, Calla assigned crews with the precision of a woman who had used organization to keep her heart from falling apart and now used it to keep men from falling in. "Shorty on chain," she said. "Ox on posts. Pike, ours, not the other one. Take the inside curl and ride it like you owe it money. Basin Joe, if I catch you betting on whether the boom holds, I'll collect your debt in the tally." Men grinned and got on with it. Beryl sent down bread as ballast. Mabel sent down cents in a bucket. At mid-afternoon, the weather chose sides. Rain came down with conviction. The river responded by becoming larger. The bend remembered its other names, the ones men use when no one's listening. Calla felt the low thrum change under her boots and signaled without words. The crews adjusted, which is to say, they obeyed without thinking in a way that isn't obedience so much as trust spending itself wisely. Then Ox shouted a word no one wanted. "Jam!" Calla turned. Upstream, just ahead of the bend, logs had married against a rock spear and were producing children. The pile grew itself with the ingenuity of disaster. Pressed from behind by the river, it decided to make a dam out of men's. "Intentions! Cut it!" Calla yelled. "Inside first, don't get cute!" They went at it with peevees and profanity. Shorty swore in 2 languages and 3 tenses. The jam did what jams do, held, considered, relented a hair to give you hope, then held harder. "Powder!" someone shouted. "Not unless you want to greet the army with toothpicks," Calla snapped. "We bleed it there. See the key? She's tucked the liar. Pull her belly." They pried. The key log thought about its choices. It stayed. The river pushed. The boom groaned. A long metal complaint. Calla. Rowan's voice arriving from behind. "If you let it build, you'll either get a rush that tears the boom or a stall that makes Sunday out of Friday." She shot him a look. He didn't flinch. "I know," she said. "We're running out of patience and men." He nodded. His eyes went past her, not over her. "Take the catwalk," he said, as if handing her a tool. "I'll stand with Ox. On the post," she went, "because work doesn't wait for feelings to decide their angle." The catwalk shuddered under the run of water shedding the jam. She planted, braced, levered. The key log slid a breath, then another. The river sucked at the gap like a mouth rethinking its bite. "More," she called, and Shorty and Pike, theirs, put their peevees in like men, about to get a sermon from Beryl if they failed. The key log gave up its opinion. The jam exhaled. Water laughed like a thing that had not meant harm. It simply wanted moving. Calla looked up in time to see a man where no man should be, standing on the high bank in the rain with a rifle already shouldered, the muzzle a dark handshake pointed at Rowan. She didn't think. She moved. Her shoulder took Rowan's ribs in a hard, rude shove that knocked him behind the post and put her where he had been. The shot came like a line drawn from cause to consequence. The post behind her head sprouted a black-eyed hole. The river swallowed the sound and saved it for later. "Down!" Rowan roared, and then he was on his feet against Dr. Harper's orders, which meant the world had changed its mind about who got to make rules. Ox charged the bank the way a wall might decide to migrate. Shorty's bullet answered the shooter's and took a hat off a head that ducked too late. The man vanished down the far slope into the trees. "Deke Mallory," Shorty panted when he returned with nothing but breath and rain on his face. "Saw the back of him. Coulter's paid barrel." "Deke Mallory," Calla repeated, putting a name on the casing she'd kept. "Fine. Now I know what to call what I'm going to stop." "Miss Tallis." Dr. Harper's voice very close. "You're bleeding." Calla looked down. Her sleeve was wet. The blood wasn't hers. It was the boathouse night returning to say it had not been finished with Rowan. She shook once and then made her breath behave. "We hold the boom," she said. We deliver. Then we go catch a habit and break it. They delivered by candlelight and brainlight, which are the same thing if you're tired enough. The army took their timber, counted it twice, because some men count their gratitude, and sent up a cheer that sounded like expulsion of fear. Calla wrote the last figure in the ledger and closed it as if shutting a door on weather. She turned and found Rowan watching her with the look of a man who has decided to keep breathing whether or not the air deserves it. "You're an answer," he said. He looked astonished, which made the words honest. "I'm a tall woman who refuses to bend just because the door frames here are short," she said, "because humor is what you put between you and a remark that might make you fall over." He took a step closer and then stopped, because Dr. Harper's stitches had more authority than desire. "Calla, I know," she said, and left the rest for a day when the town was not listening. At dawn, a boy from the upstream camp came running with his cap in his hand and a word no one wanted: "Sluice." "What about it?" Rowan asked, already on his feet. "Coulter's men opened it in the night," the boy gasped. "Said a beaver dam broke, but Ike says no beaver writes its name in a padlock." He gulped air. "There's a head of water coming like a herd." Calla saw it in her mind the way she sees numbers before they add. Water building behind a gate, pressure growing like resentment, the sudden release making a false flood. She didn't wait to be told to run. She ran because running is also a kind of leadership when there's no time to make a speech. They reached the bend to find the river already talking louder. The catwalk, repaired, improvised, shook under men. The boom took a new strain that made it sing like a cable with a coin on its tongue. "If we hold like this," Shorty said, "we'll rip the posts. If we swing her," Ox countered, "we'll lose a third of the raft. Better a third than all, and the town with it," Calla said. Her eyes traced angles, forces, and consequences as if they were written in chalk on the water. "Release," she decided, the word heavy because it asked two different prices and insisted both be paid. "We cut the south chain and swing the boom into the side channel. The flood will ride past the wharf. We'll lose some logs, but we'll keep the town." Rowan nodded once, the way a man does when his heart argues and his head wins. "Do it." She went alone because it was faster. To go alone. The south chain's anchor post stood on a spit of mud that already pretended to be island. The release pin was a foot of iron flush to the post, peened over for safety and hammered in for arrogance. Water clawed at Calla's shins, then her knees, then her hips. She braced and put both hands on the pin. It didn't move. "Shorty," she yelled over her shoulder. "Sledge!" He tossed the hammer end over end on a rope like a bell. It slammed into her palms and tried to take her with it. She caught it, set the head against the pin, and drove. It rang in her bones and moved, scarcely the width of a hair. "Again!" Rowan shouted, voice shredded by rain and fear. "Give it your tall." She gave it everything her long body had learned to carry: men's opinions, door frames, letters that said no, telegraphs that said never, banks that used rules like knives, and the weight of a town that had decided to watch a woman not fail. She swung the hammer, and the river swung back, and the pin moved a whisper. Something flicked at the edge of her vision, a spark where there should be none. Calla's head snapped left. Under the plank at the foot of the anchor, the only piece of dry in reach, fire crawled along a cord, small and greedy. "No, not again, not now. Powder!" she screamed. "Fuse!" Rowan's oaths cut the rain in half. Men scattered the wrong direction because fear had written the map. Calla let the hammer fall on its tether and threw herself at the plank. She ripped it up with fingers that didn't care what they told her tomorrow. The fuse snake writhed. She pinched it hard near its middle and tore. It burned her thumb and died with a sullen spit. "Where's the box?" she panted at the muddy hole, praying it could hold a prayer. "Gone," Shorty said, sliding down on his belly to peer. He set the line without the belly, cheap and fast. Then the charge is up chain, Calla said, where the swing will drag it. We cut now, or it goes off under our feet. Calla! Rowan's voice, ragged. Choose. She chose. She grabbed the hammer and set it on the pin and drove. The pin moved. She drove again. The pin moved more. The chain moaned like a thing learning grief. She drove. A third time. A fourth. Almost, Shorty cried, because men make a ceremony out. Of nearly let it go, Rowan shouted. Get clear. Not yet, Calla said, because some parts of a person only know the word no one taught them. Again, she raised the hammer, and in that breath between swing and strike, a man's shape rose from the water at the edge of the spit, slick as an otter and mean as a plan. Deke Mallory's eyes met hers over the sights of a short barrel, his mouth set in the humor of men who think they've found a cheaper way to win. Move, he said. The word bored. Calla did the arithmetic she could. Do in half a heartbeat. If she stepped back, the pin wouldn't go. If she didn't, the bullet would. Her hand tightened on the hammer. Somewhere behind her a fuse hissed again, new, smarter, placed where she wouldn't look. Don't, Rowan said from the bank, his voice not an order and not a plea, something else that made the rain forget to fall for a fraction of a second. Deke's finger took up slack on the trigger. The river swelled. The chain sang, Calla swung, the hammer fell, the pin jumped, the release groaned forward, and in the same instant the hidden fuse reached what it had been crawling toward. The black seam tucked under the swing of the boom and spat its little bright answer to every decision Calla had ever made. The world cracked, water leapt, iron screamed, the chain tore free, the boom lurched toward the side channel with the speed of a good idea that doesn't wait for permission. Calla lost her stance. The hammer ripped out of her hands. Deke fired, the shot wild as the ground went out from under him and fell backward into the surge. Calla grabbed for the post. Her fingers found mud and then iron. She held. The boom swung past with a roar that made her bones think of thunder. The freed chain whipped like a striking thing and caught her across the ribs, a white pain that knocked breath into far corners. Calla! Rowan's shout tore his stitches and some other larger seam. She lifted her head to see the river, carrying Deke, and the boom taking the flood where it should go and the town still in its place on the bank, astonished to be alive. She wanted to say, I did it. Then a spark bloomed at her knee, small, obscene, the second fuse she had not seen, set for the contingency of women who keep choosing the brave thing. The fuse hissed toward the powder buried under the post, 3 inches of fire from the end of everything, and a cold hand clamped on her ankle and yanked. She went under. The world went black-green. The hiss turned to a roar in her blood. The last thing she saw before the river closed its hand was the bright stitch of flame crawling into the dark. Cold closed around Calla's ears. The world narrowed to green, black, and raw. Her body knew 2 things at once, that lungs are clocks and that panic wastes time. She let herself go slack for the blink it took to stop falling. In that blink, the fuse's hiss became a swallowed sound, and the bright stitch of flame above her went out in a white thud that pressed the water tight. The blast rolled her. It was a fist opening inside the river, a push that did not ask permission. Silt rose and made night inside night. Her ankle burned where fingers clamped like wire. The grip was not rescue. It was claim. She kicked with her free foot hard and low. Her corks bit cloth and meat. The hand on her ankle slipped, seized again, slid. A face collided with her calf, stubble, a sudden mouth, bubbles. Deke Mallory. His eyes were open, bright with the kind of anger that shines even underwater. She did the thing you are not supposed to do if you want to be considered gentler than the work. She stamped down with her corks. She felt the points take purchase, not in flesh, but in the slick leather of his jacket, and used that purchase to push her own body up. He clawed for her again, and caught mud instead. The river decided to separate them the way it separates everything. that doesn't fasten itself properly. Callah's head broke surface inside a lace of splinters. Smoke skinned the water. The boom had swung. The side channel took the worst of the flood in a gallop, logs riding high as men shouted from the bank to count living. The anchor post where the powder had been buried jutted at an apologetic angle, its base cratered, iron bent but not torn free. The town, the wharf, the warehouses, the line of people with buckets and prayers, still stood where it had stood a minute before. Callah, Rowan's voice broke itself on her name. She turned in the boil and saw him, halfway down the bank, sling abandoned, stitches forgotten, one arm locked around the chain to keep from being stolen by the river, the reaching like a promise he could not afford to make. "I'm here," she coughed, and the river put a hand over her mouth just to argue. She spat, rolled, found the back of the chain with her palms, and let its cold bite prove the world had edges. Ox came from the left, the way rocks come from the ground. He slid into the water with a swearing sound and got under her like a dock. "On," he said, and she didn't argue. He shoved her up the chain to where Rowan could grab her collar and drag her the last yard across the rack to mud. She lay on the bank on her side like a fish that had won a debate and was too surprised to move. The chain sang a low note under her ear. Men's voices rose and fell. The river kept its opinion. "Breathe," Dr. Harper said, and the command was large enough to obey. Breath came back in fits, bringing with it the taste of powder, cinders, and metal fear. Rowan's hand bracketed her head, not to hold it, but to hold the air still while she kept it. His shoulder bled into his shirt and down his arm, and he did not appear to notice. He looked at her like a man checking the sky after lightning, grateful for the cloud's continued existence. "You pulled the pin," he said. "You told me to give it my tall," she said. Her throat hurt. "So I did." He tipped his forehead toward hers and stopped before the contact because some lines the body refuses to cross when the town is watching. "You did," he said. Behind them, Shorty pelted along the bank downstream. Eyes on the flood. "Mallory!" he yelled. "I don't see—" And then he did. A body had caught on a root in the new rush, head down, one hand still clutching a gun that now did not matter. Ox went past them with the quiet speed of gravity and hauled Deke out of the side surge like a sodden sack of laughing grass. The man coughed reverent curses and then tried to put the gun back into the conversation. "Don't," Callah said, and Deke looked up and saw in her the upper story he had missed. He stopped. "Deputy," Mabel hollered, voice to the rooftops. "Bring your badge to the river if you mean it." Deputy Lowe ran, hat in hand, youth all over him but purpose too. He saw Deke, saw the gun, saw the crowd, and saw, to his credit, what to do. He pulled the cuffs from his belt and snapped them on without flourishes. "On whose authority?" Deke spat. "The one with iron in it," Lowe said, and tipped his head toward Major Ellery, who had come at a run with 2 soldiers in tow, and the expression of a man who disliked being interrupted but disliked sabotage more. "Under mine," Ellery said, breath even. "Federal contract, federal interdiction. You, sir, are under arrest for interference with army supply and attempted murder." He said it as if ordering bread. Deke laughed and winced at the same time. "You got nothing." Callah pushed herself up on an elbow and took the casing from her pocket. It had left a brass tattoo on the fabric over days of carrying. She held it where Deke could decide whether to look at his habits. "You drop your name everywhere you go," she said. "Your rifle scratches it down the side. The boathouse, last night's bank of trees, the wash below Coulter's mill. Here," she tilted the casing so the scratch caught what light the rain allowed. "You forgot to change your handwriting." Deke's face hardened into something brittle. "You can't trace—" "I can," Deputy Lowe said, surprising everyone, including himself. "Mr. Mallory, your rifle has been noted in 2 unrelated complaints. One a deer taken out of season across Mr. Fisk's posted line last fall, one a shot through Mr. Fitch's window after he denied credit to a drunk. I took that report, The casing recovered had that mark. Deke's eyes went narrow. "You boys have been busy." "No," Lowe said. "We've been reading." He nodded to Calla. "Let's add this one to the list." "Take him," Major Ellery said, civilized. Fury under his words. "We'll send for the U.S. Marshal, and if anybody in this town thinks throwing powder under a boom is clever, they can come explain clever under oath." Deke laughed again, but there wasn't much in it. "You think the man who paid me will—" "Sit still." "No," Calla said, and the word carried longer than his. "He'll run, which is how we'll catch him." By the time the rain trailed itself ragged and stopped, the side channel had taken most of its borrowed anger into the flats below. The boom, scoured and scolded, hummed like a line that had learned a hymn. The wharf regained the look of a structure, pretending it had planned for all this. People began to stand taller again without making a point of their height. Beryl pressed a tin mug into Calla's hands, something hot and sour and right. "Drink," she said. "It's the taste of choosing to live and hating the aftermath." Calla drank. Her knees began to shake only when she swallowed. "I'm going to sleep sometime in 1899, she said. "Make it sooner," Beryl said. "We got a town to haul, and it insists on being carried like a baby that weighs as much as a cow." Calla laughed, a small sound. The laugh hurt. Hurt could be titled and stored with everything else. Rowan came to her slowly, as if thinking about each step would make them explain themselves. His shoulder had been bound again by Dr. Harper, with an expression that predicted a fight she intended to win by sitting on him if necessary. "You did enough for 3 men, he said. "That's because 2 of them were busy telling me not." "On 2, she said. Her mouth wanted to smile. She let it a little. His mouth answered. "Calla," he said, and the name had changed shape in his throat. He stopped, the way a smart man stops at the edge of a thing he'd rather cross sober than full of rain and adrenaline. "Later," he said, "when we aren't watched." "Later," she agreed. She could feel the town's eyes like weather, the benevolent kind, but weather nonetheless. Later came at noon, with a note slid under the office door. The handwriting was a clerk's, neat, fast, meant for obedience, to Miss Calla Tallis and Mr. Rowan Holt, by order of Iron Ben Bank and Loan. All Holt timber accounts are hereby frozen pending investigation into last night's losses and this morning's actions at the river. Any attempt to transfer funds elsewhere will be considered fraud and prosecuted. Mr. Holt's presence is requested at the bank at 2 o'clock to discuss restructuring. Elias Fisk Mabel read it and said 3 words Calla had not heard her. "Use at volume." Beryl added 1 more and underlined it with a pan. Rowan's jaw went steady. "He thinks we're too tired to stand up," he said. "He thinks we'll bring our ledger to his table," Calla said. "Let's bring his table to ours?" "How?" Mabel asked, delighted the way people get when they are offered the right sort of trouble. "Deke," Calla said. "He'll call for his pay if he hasn't already." Rowan caught up. "He'll use Pike. And Fisk will launder Pike's loan through a clean drawer and a dirty smile," Calla said. "Because why have only one way to be wrong when you can have 3? She stood. "Let's tear the drawer out." They didn't have much law. What they had, they brought. Deputy Lowe, Major Ellery, whose jurisdiction lay in a narrow channel, but whose temper, once roused, ran banks. Dr. Harper, who did not enjoy politics but enjoyed bullying bullies more. Mabel and Beryl, who constituted the fire brigade of human behavior. Shorty and Ox, who could look like furniture in a room and hear every word said in it. And Calla, who had a ledger and 3 casings in her pocket and a stitch of fuse burned into her thumb. At 1:45, they walked down Iron Ben's main street. People stepped aside without being told. News runs ahead of feet. Even men who had mocked Calla's height the week before now measured her with a ruler they'd found in themselves, and not in a joke. Fisk was waiting in his office with his smile already folded and set on the desk. He wore the expression bankers wear when they are obliged to recognize other human beings temporarily as more than accounts. "Mr. Holt," he said. "Miss Tallis, I'm afraid your behavior this morning has precipitated a review." His eyes slid over the small crowd behind them and tried to find a policy. "We don't conduct business as spectacle." "Then let's do it as audit," Kalla said, and put the Army's second purchase order on the desk. "Federal notarized. Clause 5. The Major will be happy to review it with you if the words won't hold still." Fisk's lip showed a polite regret. "I cannot honor this until I am satisfied as to the safety of your collateral." "That's not what Clause 5 says," Major Ellery said. He had taken off his gloves with unnecessary calm. "It says, upon delivery, accepted by government. Officer, payment shall be made to contractor immediately. Banks may stand clear or be stood clear." Fisk's eyes flicked to the gold braid on the Major's sleeve and then to the town behind him. He reorganized his face. "I see." Before he could choose whether to see farther, the side door opened. Without knocking, and Jeremiah Pike came in with a hat he wanted the room to admire, and did not because no one was the room but self-interest. "Elias," he said casual, "I'll need that draft." He stopped when he saw Kalla. "Miss Tallis," he said, turning the words over like a man inspecting unfamiliar coin. "What a surprise." "Not really," Kalla said. "We told you we were coming." Pike's eyes went thin. "What is this?" "An intervention," Mabel said cheerfully. "We interrupt your scheduled program to bring you consequences." Pike laughed. It was a gun emptying the last of its echo. "Deputy," he said, "are we doing law in companies now? How modern." "We're doing it with what we have," Lowe said. "And what we have is you, a man paid to hire a man to shoot at honest people." Pike cut his gaze to Fisk. It was the look a man gives a partner when the bar fight they started, together, has gone unfunny. Fisk looked away as if studying a map that didn't include the town he was currently in. Kalla reached into her pocket and set the spent casings on the desk in a row, like sums that had memorized themselves. "Boathouse," she said, tapping the first. "Wharf." Tap. "South chain." Tap. "All the same note." She turned to Pike. "And you paid the man who played them?" Pike lifted a shoulder. "You have no proof." "You have no poker face," Beryl observed. "I can season better than that blindfolded." "Mr. Pike," Major Ellery said, and now his voice was the thing that enters a room and takes chairs away. "You interfered with Army supply. You conspired to do it again. You attempted murder. I hope your hat keeps the rain off while you... Consider what you'll say when the marshal arrives." "You have no marshal," Pike said reflexively. Dr. Harper smiled. "We sent for one. We used the telegraph. It's like a long string that bites." "And until he arrives," Lowe added, "you have me." He stepped closer to Pike. The deputy's hand shook slightly, but the badge on his chest did not. "Put out your hands." Pike did not. He did not move at all. Stillness is sometimes the bravest thing a bully does when he finally recognizes the shape of his odds. "Elias," he said softly, eyes on Fisk. "You going to let this?" Fisk had been looking at the Army order as if he'd hoped the ink would scold itself off the page. Now he looked up and tried to decide which way to lean without scuffing his shoes. He had meant only to pinch, not to break. He had meant to profit, not to be present at the inventory of his soul. "Mr. Pike," he said, and his voice surprised him by being almost human, "you will submit to the deputy." To Lowe, "Do your duty." Pike's laugh hit the wall and fell to the floor. "You coward," he said. "You were happy enough to freeze their accounts when I asked you to." "I was," Fisk said. His face did something complicated. "And I am now unfreezing them without being asked." Kalla saw it land in the room, the small shift, not redemption, but an adjustment of weight. Men change like weather, not like miracles. She took the army's draft from Fisk's hand when he offered it and set it back down in front of him with a patience that wasn't permission. "Deposit," she said, "then pay our crew over your counter like a banker who knows why a town exists." Fisk stared at her and then at the town that had decided to witness him. He nodded to his teller. "Deposit," he said, "and bring Holt Timber's payroll, not from escrow." Pike went for his pocket a fraction too late. Ox moved a fraction too early and had the man's wrist in an honest grip before the pocket could finish being sly. Lowe cuffed him with hands that had learned from last night how to stop shaking. "Jeremiah Pike," Deputy Lowe said, the name hard between his teeth. "You are under arrest." Pike smiled for the benefit of whatever god he kept in a jar. "I'll own this bank by winter." "Maybe," Mabel said, "but you'll be sending letters from a different address." For the length of a summer storm, the town worked as if nothing had happened and everything had. Fisk counted and paid. Men came, with hats in their hands and left with coin and the odd shaking breath that says a person has survived both river and debt. Beryl used the bank's counting table as if it were a sideboard and fed coffee to anyone whose eyes looked like falling asleep would drop them too far. Dr. Harper wrote notes in a hand you could set a splint by. Major Ellery drafted a statement for the Telegraph that used the word felony twice and army 3 times. Ox stood by the door and made the space his presence requires. Shorty leaned against a pillar and watched the street for the twitch of a muzzle that never came. Calla took last turns, handing envelopes, answering small questions, turning away the first of the reporters who never called themselves that and always asked for the same thing, a quote you regret by sundown. When at last the counter held only dust and habit, she stepped outside. The street lay under a rinsed sky. The river sounded like a thing that remembered taking and decided to give back a little. Rowan joined her on the bank where the day spilled itself into evening. They stood without touching because they hadn't learned what it would feel like yet. "You brought the town through," he said. "We brought the town through," she said. "You, Ox, Shorty, Beryl, every back and hand." Deputy Lowe grew spine in public. Fisk remembered how to be useful. "The army carried weight with more than words." She tilted her head at him. "And you kept telling the river it wasn't allowed to take me." "I told the river to try me instead," he said softly. It declined. They were quiet for a minute that the town did not intrude on. Quiet enough for the peep of frogs in the rush and the distant clink of tools being put away. "Say it," she prompted at last, "because some kindnesses are instructions." "I keep thinking I should make a speech," he said, eyes on the bend, "about contracts and courage and ledger lines that behaved and don't. Then I remember you don't need speeches. You need a man who knows he can't own what he loves." He took a breath. "Calla Tallis, will you build with me? That you will not count me as advantage or subtract me as inconvenience. That you will let my height be what it is in rooms where men like to run their hands along the doorframe and tell me it's too low. That you will not ask me to bend because someone else is short." He smiled with his eyes first, then let his mouth keep up. "Done," he said, "and yours for me." "That you will climb when I point higher," she said, "even when your shoulder argues. It will always argue," he said. "I will always ignore it." She took one step, the kind of step that turns 2 people into a thing with edges no one else is entitled to, and let her forehead fit the place under his cheekbone that the world had sculpted without asking him first. He breathed in like a man remembering that air was permitted. He did not try to make her smaller. He matched her height with his own and let the difference be what it was. Behind them, someone whistled a single soft note and then stopped before it became commentary. Beryl, probably. Mabel, likely. The town, generous for once. The marshal came on the second day in a coat that had dust on the hem and justice on the collar. He took Jeremiah Pike and Deke Mallory away with the efficiency of a man reading the last page of a book someone else already spoiled for him. Fisk signed statements stiffly and then went back to counting beans in a way that looked almost humble, which is the beginning of contrition in accountants. Mr. Fitch stood in his shop window and watched Calla go by with a ledger under her arm and a breath she was not conserving for someone else's comfort. He came out once, hat in hand, shame surprising his face like sun at midnight. "Miss Tallis," he said, I received your trunk. I thought to have it delivered. I wanted to say—" He trailed off because he had never had to build a sentence. "And tall enough to hold an apology. You wanted to say you were wrong," Calla supplied. "Yes," he said, grateful to the scaffold she'd given him. "I was small." "You were," she said. "Try being longer." He nodded, a man who might yet learn moderation in the use of fear. "If you ever I need you to stop measuring women like they're shelves," she said. "Start." With that, she left him there with his change counted correctly for once. The boathouse rose again, built by hands that had learned to tie themselves to work that matters. Rowan drew the first line. Ox raised the first post. Shorty hammered nails with the urgency of a man turning anger into architecture. Mabel christened it with a pot not made for such ceremony and did it anyway. They named the place Tall Post because it made the men laugh and made Calla laugh too, and because sometimes you put the truth on a sign so strangers don't have to ask. On the day they launched the first scow from the rebuilt slip, the river ran like a long animal in a good mood. The boom lay easy, and the chains sang a tune that did not put teeth on edge. "You know," Beryl said, wiping her hands on an apron that had traveled 1,000 lives. "For a woman rejected for being too tall, you turned out to be exactly the right size." "I was always the right size," Calla said. "Everyone else had the wrong rulers." Rowan heard and did not add to it. He was learning the parts of her work that did not need his words. They took the Third Army order with less fear and more speed because fear had done its work and didn't need to be paid twice. Calla stood on the boom with her peavy and her long eyes and called what she saw. Men listened quicker. The town slept better. Fisk made a point of standing in his doorway at noon and not saying anything foolish. Deputy Lowe wore his badge, as if it had begun to be something he put on for himself, and not for the bank. Dr. Harper convinced 3 men to keep their arms in, their slings long enough to finish healing, because she set Mabel to watching their doors. Major Ellery left with a handshake that counted, promised to send word ahead next time, with proper notice, and actually did. At night, when the camp quieted and the river became a long thought instead of a clamour, Calla and Rowan sat at the office table with the globe that had had its oceans rubbed off by somebody's hope. They traced routes with fingers and wrote numbers and did not pretend the work would get lighter. They only agreed that they wanted to carry it together. "What will you do with your ledger when we're old?" Rowan asked once. "And the Ben knows us by our first names." "I'll teach a girl not to apologize for where her eyes are," Calla said, "and a boy not to be frightened when he meets them. And us. We'll be 2 posts at the edge of the water," she said. "Men will tie their boats to us and curse the knots and bless them in the same breath." He turned his hand to fit hers. "Done." On a morning that could have been any, and therefore mattered, Calla walked the catwalk at first light. Mist rose off the logs in a breath the river did not know it was making. The world felt blue and new. She paused where the south chain attached. To the post they'd sunk after the flood, and set her palm to the iron. It was warm already, not from sun but from the ghosts of friction and will. "Thank you," she said, not to the chain, but to the part of herself that had learned to swing the hammer when a man with a barrel told her not to. Rowan came out of the mist as if the river made him when she asked for him. He put his left hand, the good one, on the post beside hers, and did not speak until their palms had agreed on the temperature of the day. "Major sent a letter," he said. "The marshal says Pike will stand trial in Canyon City. Mallory, too. There will be witnesses who do not forget their names." "Good," Calla said. "May their sentences have height." He smiled. And Fisk sent biscuits. I think it's apology. Or guilt, Calla said. We'll feed it to the men and call it good either way. They stood together a while longer, because standing is sometimes the thing that does the work, even after the work is done. You ever think of Sacramento? Rowan asked. Of what letter writers there are saying about the woman who got off a train and changed a bend. They're saying I should have worn shorter boots, she said. They're saying I aimed too high and hit a weather vane. She turned and let him see how little those voices had left in her. But in Iron Bend, she said, there are men learning to build posts where the water listens, and women who know numbers are a language you can argue with without being told to be quiet. That's enough for me. It's enough for me, he said. He leaned then, just enough. She let the lean become a press, and if the town saw, it kept its mouth shut for once, and simply minded the river. When the town gathered that evening, at Tallpost, to toast the rebuilt boathouse with coffee and the cheap whiskey that becomes expensive when poured after a reprieve, Mabel stood on a crate and tried to be heard without yelling. We name this place for the woman who made the boom, move when it needed to, and who cut a fuse with her bare fingers because nobody else was close enough, she said. We name it for the idea that height is a blessing when used well. We name it for the work and the hands that do it. She raised a tin mug. To Calla. To Calla, the town said, and the river carried the syllables down and around and back. Calla lifted her own mug and shook her head. To all of you, she said, to the posts that held, the chain that sang, the hands that did not let go, to a town that learned how to measure people with better rulers. She glanced at Rowan and let the look be what it was. To work. Worth carrying. The mugs clinked. The sky went to blue ash. Somewhere a violin got its feelings hurt and then recovered. Shorty danced with Dr. Harper once and did not step on her toes because he wanted to continue breathing with both lungs. Later, when the crowd thinned and the night fattened around the edges, Rowan and Calla walked the edge of the wharf. The river moved below, like a muscle under skin. He took her hand, slow enough that she could decide whether to let him keep it. Perfect, he said, as if trying the word in a different room. She squeezed. Don't aim at a word, she said. Aim at the work. I am, he said. And at the life that goes with it. She looked up, always up because her eyes were built that way, and saw stars sitting on the ridge like men after supper, content. She had come to Iron Bend with a trunk and a letter and a number of inches that made other people tidy their opinions. She had found a ledger and a river and a man who understood that building is a kind of love that raises rather than reduces. In the dark, the rebuilt boathouse creaked once like a house settling into itself. The sound was consent. 2 more great. Stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.